Welcome to episode 197 of Real Health Radio. You can find the links talked about as part of this episode at the show notes, which is 7, so the word all spelled out, seven-health.com/197. 7 Health is currently taking on new clients, and there are a handful of reasons that clients commonly come and work with us. So hypothalamic amenorrhea is the first one, and that's the fancy name for not getting a period. And this is often the result of undereating and overexercising for what the body needs, irrespective of your actual weight. And it's almost always coupled with body dissatisfaction and a fear of gaining weight. We work with clients along the disordered eating and eating disorder spectrum. And sometimes clients wouldn't think to use the term disordered eating to describe themselves, but they do see that they're overly restrictive with their eating, fear certain types of foods, whether that be breads or carbs or processed foods. They feel compelled to exercise excessively and or find themselves binging or feeling out of control around food. Moving on with dieting is another reason. So clients have had years or decades of dieting and are realizing it's a failed endeavor, but they struggle to figure out how to eat and look after their body without dieting. So how do they eat? How do they listen to their body? What will become of their weight? They're confused and overwhelmed. Body dissatisfaction and negative body image is probably the last one. Many of our clients experience feelings of body shame and hatred, and they find themselves fixated on weight, determined to be a particular size, and just frustrated by what they see in the mirror. They may even avoid social events, they opt out of photographs or put off appointments with doctors as a result of negative body thoughts. And in all of these areas, we're able to help, and we do so with a mix of understanding physiology and psychology, so understanding how to support the physical body and how the body works, but also being compassionate and uncovering the whys behind clients' behavior and figuring out how they can change this. If any of these are areas you want to help with, then please get in contact. You can head over to 7-health.com/help. And there you can read about how we work with clients and apply for a free initial chat. So the address again is 7-health.com/help. And I'll also include that in the show notes. Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Real Health Radio. I am your host, Chris Sandel. Let's start off today with the book giveaway. So this week, the winner is Lolly O. So Lolly, you'll be receiving a book from of your choosing from our resources page, and we'll be in touch shortly about this. Reviews are a huge help to this podcast and can really help our listenership, and they're also a way for you to win a free book. All you need to do is leave a review on iTunes, take a screenshot of it, and then email it to info@7-health.com, and then you'll be permanently entered into the draw. And thank you to everyone who has already done this. So this week on the show, it is a guest interview, and my guest today is Connie Sobczak. So Connie is the author of Embody, Learning to Love Your Unique Body and Quiet That Critical Voice. Her book in which she skillfully and lovely reconnects readers to their essence and life force. Her experience with an eating disorder in her teen years and the death of her sister Stephanie inspired her work to help people live with more appreciation and love for their precious bodies. She co-founded her non-profit organization, The Body Positive, in honor of her sister and to ensure that her daughter Carmen and other children who grow up in the world where people are free to focus on things in life that really matter. Connie has been training body positive facilitators for more than 20 years and uses her writing and creative skills to produce the Body Positives curricula, videos, digital courses, and live trainings. She delights in working with students, parents, educators, treatment providers, and anyone who shares her vision of fostering body liberation and peace. Connie's passion is watching the light that emerges when people recognize and embrace their magnificent, authentic selves. So I've been aware of Connie and the Body Positive for a while now. I read her book Embody and really loved the message of the book, and so wanted to have Connie on the show so we could talk about it. And as part of the conversation, we talk about Connie's background and go deeper into many of the things touched on in her bio. So her and her sister Stephanie's eating disorders and how Connie got better while her sister never did. The birth of her daughter around the time of Stephanie's death and how this was pivotal in making her or shaping the career that she has gone on to have. And we talk a lot about Carmen, her daughter, and how that impacted on the way that she parented and a lot of the things that she did throughout Carmen's young life and then in her teenage years to support her to have a different relationship with food and body than Connie did when she was growing up. And as part of the training that Connie does at the Body Positive, there are 5 core competencies to this model. So there's competency 1, reclaim your health. Competency 2, practice intuitive self-care. Competency 3, cultivate self-love. Competency 4, declare your authentic beauty. And competency 5, build community. So with this conversation, a lot of it is then going through each of these different competencies in detail to better understand what each of them is about. And despite naming the company the Body Positive back in 1996, in more recent years, there's been some backlash against the Body Positive movement. There's also been pushback on the idea of self-love, which is one of the competencies as part of the model. So we have a great discussion about this, and Connie is very wonderful at being articulate about her position and how she thinks about these things. And I really enjoyed this conversation with Connie, much like my conversation recently with Elise Resch that was released back in January time, episode 183 of the podcast. It was lovely to have the time to go through each of these components of the model and better understand them, and for us to be able to talk about how these ideas play out in the real world through our experiences with coaching and with clients. This was a really enjoyable conversation. I will be back at the end of this episode with some further recommendations of things you might want to be checking out. But for now, let's get on with the interview. Here is my conversation with Connie Sobczak. Hey, Connie, welcome to Real Health Radio. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me today.
Oh, it's my pleasure, Chris. I'm so happy to be here.
So you run the Body Positive and have been doing so for a number of decades. And I know you offer many trainings as part of this, both aimed at practitioners and the lay public, which I think is amazing. And so a part of the Be Body Positive model that as one of the trainings you do, there are 5 competencies that you teach. So I want to spend a chunk of today's time with you, like going through those 5 competencies and helping people understand why they're important and some of the practical ideas for how they can be addressing them. But I guess as a starting place, do you want to just give the listeners a bit of background on yourself, who you are, what you do, what trainings you've done, that sort of thing?
Yes, I'd love to do that. So I came to this work. I'm the co-founder and executive director of the Body Positive. I founded it for personal reasons mostly. So I'd love to share a little bit of my history and how I got where I am. I had an eating disorder when I was a teenager. I had bulimia, and it came from home pressures, not on me, but on my sister. My father was very critical of my sister's body, my oldest sister, Stephanie, and she was very tall. She was a big person. And looking back, I can see that she was probably binge eating during those years because of the shame she felt about her body and never fit in anywhere. I mean, her feet were size 12. She was just this really big person. And so he was constantly on her case about the calories that, do you know how many calories are in that food? And I was prepubescent. I was very small. I was different genetics, but I took all of that information in, and I didn't want my dad talking about me that way. And then combined with all of my friends at school, I was probably around 12 years old. All of my friends were starting to diet and hate their bodies. So I just really got sucked into all of that. And by 15, ended up with bulimia. And it really affected my life. My sister also, she went to Weight Watchers. She lost a bunch of weight. She gained it all back, plus more, as everybody does. And then she also developed bulimia. So we found out at some point that we both had it. We bonded over our body hatred and really supported each other in our disordered eating. It was a really unfortunate connection that we had. Yeah. I was pretty lucky. At the age of 21, I got over my eating disorder on my own. I had transferred to university at Berkeley, California, and my eating disorder just really went out of control. And I kept dropping in and out of school, thinking something was wrong with my major. At the time I had it, there was no word for bulimia. So I was really lost. There was no support. There was no awareness. There was no internet. There was nothing. I was really isolated. And so I got to a point where I was really unhappy with my life and didn't know what I was going to do. And then I feel like there was this spark of life inside of me that the flame did not go out, and I hung on to that. And I healed myself. I changed my relationships. I left the partner I was in, who had been a part of my eating disorder and wanted me to look a different way than I did. I made new friends who were not in diet culture, who really just enjoyed life and food, and we had fun together. And I just really started living my life. My sister, Stephanie, right around that time, a little bit before that, she had also gotten breast implants, and one of them hardened, and 2 doctors took their forehands and crushed the implant, which caused silicone to ooze into her bloodstream. And she developed an autoimmune disease that really was debilitating. And so fast forward to when she was 36, she died from complications from the autoimmune disease plus malnutrition, because she never got over her eating disorder. So she was pretty much anorexic and bulimic until the day she died. So I had spent my 20s really healing my relationship with my body and really learning to have, I taught myself intuitive eating and exercise. There was no, those words weren't around, and there was no field and no help. And I really had to do it all on my own. I really learned how to listen deeply, deeply to my body and developed an intuitive life is really what I did. And so when my sister died, I was the mother of a 1-year-old girl, and I just felt overwhelmed with the responsibility of raising a child in a culture that supported body hatred. And I just knew that it would never, ever, ever happen to her, because I am a fiercely protective mother. And so I decided I would change the world for Carmen, my daughter. And here we are. From there, I figured out that I wanted to make videos for teenagers, because I felt that if they're going to be the next ones who are going to either have children or be in role models for children in their lives, that I wanted to plant seeds of a different way of being in a human body. And so starting with that, and then I met Elizabeth Scott, my amazing co-founder of The Body Positive, and she's a therapist who had been working in schools with girls around recovery from eating problems. And so we joined forces and developed our facilitator training program and made more videos, and started working with all genders and all ages, and then started working with treatment providers later on. And so 2.5 decades later, here we are. And many lives have changed. The world is still not changing as fast as I want. But I think the most powerful thing for me is to see that my daughter's life actually was very different than mine. And she grew up really with she was fully embodied. She was fully connected to her body. And not that her life is perfect, but she is a person who really so deeply knows herself. And it's really incredible to see. And then thousands and thousands of other people who have been involved with the organization and seeing how their lives have changed. It's been an amazing ride.
Wow. Okay, so there's a lot there that I want to go back and just get some more color on. Yeah, sure. So, I mean, you mentioned about your dad and the comments that he made towards your sister and really how you took that on board as well. What about, did you have a mom at that stage? And what was her relationship with food like?
Yeah, my mom is really interesting. She's 92 now, and she lives with us. My dad died many years, almost a decade ago. My mom is an amazing human, and she never had body issues. She's pretty much a farm woman. At the time of all of this happening, we were living on a farm, and she cooked for us. She never said a word about our bodies. The thing was that she wasn't really connected with us during those years in terms of talking to us about what we were struggling with. She never challenged my father about anything. about what he was saying to my sister. So she was kind of absent, I think. And looking back now, my mom is a brilliant woman and should have been a doctor or somebody who was in science somehow. And I see that at that time in her life, she was very unfulfilled and probably depressed. And these were while my sisters and I were all teenagers. I have another sister as well. And so I think that she was just kind of absent. But her relationship with her body, she never criticized herself. She never was on a diet ever in my life. So all of this came from my father.
And what about
her absence?
You mentioned there about having a third sister. So what was her relationship with food like, and how did this impact on her?
Yeah, I think that so it's interesting. I see three sisters. One died, one thrived by facing death, really. I was suicidal at one point. And my middle sister struggled with body dissatisfaction for a long time. I think that she never really had to shake her to get through it. So I think she kind of got stuck in the culture of thinking she was supposed to change. But ultimately, I mean, she's had an off and on again relationship with her body. So she's doing better now.
Okay. And you mentioned at the time when you developed bulimia, there was no word for it, or at least you weren't aware of a word for it. So how was it then when you later discovered there was a descriptor and that this was, I don't know, a thing that other people dealt with? Because obviously you found out that you and your sister were doing it, but were you aware that this was, I don't know, a common thing that was going on among friends or among other people?
Well, it was interesting because it was a normalized behavior with all of my friends in high school. Everybody I know, all of my close friends had it, and we just thought that was just a normal behavior. So when I did find out, so in my process of healing, I had, I think, a month with a therapist, and my mom paid for me to go to therapy. I started with because I kept saying I have some form of anorexia. And so finally, when I spoke out about it to my mom, I went to a hypnotherapist who wasn't helpful because I kept saying, if I weigh X number of pounds, then I'll never do this behavior again. And so that obviously didn't work. And then I went to a male therapist who just sat and stared at me, and it was really bad. But the one thing he did do the first day I was there, he said that he said, go home and read our local paper. And I did. And there was an article about, they called it bulimorexia at the time. And so I read that, and that started a process of realizing that there were other people in the world that had it. Then as I changed my friend group, I was working at a restaurant, and I made friends with this amazing woman whose mother was a therapist treating people with eating disorders and who had a sister who had anorexia. And so her mother ended up sending me a packet of information, articles and little pamphlets and all sorts of stuff about eating disorders. And that really helped me a lot, because that's when I started to realize I was part of a larger group of people who were really struggling. And then from there, after my behaviors were over, I did all of that really on my own. I stopped seeing the therapist. It just was not good. And I just really connected with my friend group. Not that I would recommend that to others to stop seeing their therapist at all. I wish someone had said, here's a better therapist at that time. However, I did get to a good therapist finally after my bulimic behaviors were over. And she was the author of a book called The Obsession, Reflections on the Tyranny of Slenderness. Her name's Kim Chernin. And early writings on the feminist side of body hatred in women. And so I was so fortunate I got to work with her. So at that point, that's when I woke up and I got really angry at the world. I chopped it was just one of these, like, chopped all my hair off. I got really mad, and I started seeing it as a cultural issue, not just an individual, and it broke the isolation completely.
Nice. And what about like exercise as part of this? Like, how was your relationship with exercise growing up? Was that a component of the bulimia in terms of over-exercising?
Yes, it was. I was a compulsive runner, And I stopped when I stopped the behaviors. I decided to step back completely. And then what I love in terms of creating intuitive movement in my life is at that point when I really made peace with my body and I put on weight. I was an underweight bulimic, and my body, as I started eating food and nourishing myself, I put on weight. And so it was a really interesting process. I was at that time with a partner who was incredibly loving and saw me as a whole human being and really helped me heal as well. And I then started slowly adding in movement again. And what I realized was I found the hills above my house. I hadn't been in Berkeley that long, and I didn't realize that there were these incredible trails up above my house. And so I started going up there and just playing. And I would, I love to run downhill. So I love to go up, walk uphill and kind of work out my problems and think, and then run as fast as I can downhill. So I started doing that and just playing. And I had a friend that I would be in the hills with, and we would skip along the path and we would laugh, and we were in nature, and it was just so much fun. And so exercise that way became a really beautiful thing. And then I was able to start running again on a track. I had a track near my house, and I really enjoyed it. And what I did, because I had been a really fast runner and a, quote unquote good runner when I was eating disordered, as I was on the track, as someone would go by me, I would have a mantra, and I would say faster than some, slower than some. And as I passed by somebody else, I would say faster than some, slower than some. So I allowed myself just to be in that middle place. I wasn't trying to perfect anything, but my track was at the top of a hill where I could look out over the San Francisco Bay. And so I just took in nature. And even when I was running on a track, and nature has always been healing for me. So that was what I did.
Yeah. And being able to find that love of exercise for a very different reason than I imagine it was in the earlier days when you were running.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yes, it had nothing to do with trying to change my body anymore. It was to have fun. And yes, fitness is a wonderful thing, but it's never, even still, it's not about I'm going to be fit or I'm going to be good and exercise. For me, it's just I need to let the tension out of my brain. My mind is a very active place. Yeah. I have a lot of physical energy, so I need to release it through my body and through movement. So I really need movement in my life to stay calm and happy. I mean, my family, at a certain point, I remember we were, living at the base of this one hill, and I would be all tense, and either my daughter or my husband would say, "Go for your hike, Connie. You need to get out," and I'd come back and I'd be a different person. It was amazing. Just the release and for me, the being in nature and remembering being connected to the earth just changes me. The one thing that saved me, it's an interesting story. When I was a teenager, since the age of 2, I've been going to this lake in the mountains in the Sierra Nevada mountain range. And there's this lake there that has a mountain that rises 1,000 feet out of it. And so when I was around 12, my friends and I started climbing it, and we free climb and we just wander around on this mountain. And then as I got older in my teen years, I started really doing some technical climbing with one of the friends. And it really saved me. During the time that I was there, I was in touch with my body. I was in tune with my body. I didn't think about trying to change my body. And as I climbed, you have to know that where you're going to move your hand or your foot is going to be safe, and that it's going to hold you up. And so it's so intuitive. It's so much about listening absolutely 100% deeply to what I knew and how to use my body. And that is something that I think allowed me to develop my intuitive eating and exercise habits on my own, because I had this connection with my body in that way. So I didn't know it at the time that's what it was I was doing, but that's really what was happening.
And were you able to do that and come back to that because the rock climbing was, unattached to the way that you thought about other exercise? Like whenever you were doing that, that was a moment where it wasn't about the size or shape of your body. It was about the thing of doing climbing.
Absolutely. And this lake where I go, I feel so fortunate. It healed. I mean, it's such a healing place, and I still go. I've been going literally I'm turning 60 this year, and I've been going every year since then. And it's such a healing place, and feeling held almost by this mountain and being connected to the rocks. And I know it sounds a little goofy, but it is where my soul feels alive and where I feel connected to something much larger than myself. So being on the rocks and also being with a group of friends there that weren't dieting, that weren't focused on changing their body. So I had this really beautiful once a year friend group all through my teenage years where I would go and have really this open space, a safe space to be myself. And they loved me and they didn't care what I looked like. And so that was a really unique experience and very helpful.
And did you notice throughout those teenage years when you were bulimic that you then weren't participating in those behaviors when you were there?
Yes, I was very aware. And then I would go home and it would all start again and I would get incredibly depressed and I would be depressed for months. And I just kept saying, I wish I could live in that place all the time. And finally, during the time when I actually healed myself, I had the awareness that I could have that in my mind. And so I brought it with me. And that was a big part of my healing, was bringing that experience home in my mind and holding on to it when I was having hard days.
And so that sounds like a great skill to have. How would you do that? Was that through visualization or was it you remembering things? How were you able to do that?
I think both. I am a very visual person. So I think that when I was sad, I could sit down and close my eyes and see myself there and see myself with my friends and see myself on the rocks and see myself in this amazing place and in the lake and swimming and lying on my back and looking up at the sky and being under the stars. And I could visualize it all, and I would do that. And then I think also through writing, I am a writer. And so I write a lot, and I had journals during that time. And so I would write it down and remember things. And when I was healing, I was 21. So I was through my teenage years. And so this is when it really started sinking in. And so I was making other changes in my life at the same time. So I was able to be more conscious about what was happening and what made me happy and what made me not happy.
Yeah. And you mentioned about your sister and obviously her going in a very different trajectory to you. So how was it for you as you're recovering and getting better and then seeing her still stuck in that place? What was your relationship with her like?
It changed our relationship. Part of my healing story is that right at the very end, when I was just about over my bulimic behaviors, she won a trip for two to Hawaii, and she asked me to go with her. And so we went, but before we went, I said, Stephanie, I'm not going to go if we're going to engage in our binging and purging, because I'm almost through doing that and I don't want to do that anymore in my life. So I will not go with you unless you promise me that that's not going to happen. And she promised. And so I brought all that literature with me from my friend's mom, and we sat and we read through it, and we started eating in different ways together, and then supporting one another and in keeping the food in. And each morning we would look in the mirror and put on our bathing suits, and I'd say, you look just the same as you did yesterday. And she'd say the same to me. And so we mirrored each other. And it was this really beautiful experience. We were together for about 10 days. And I came home and that was it. I never, that was the end of my bulimia. And so, but she went back to it. And so my conversations with her were harder during that time. And I felt less connected to her than I had before. And I needed to, on some level, to, especially in the early years, to be able to keep my own recovery.
Yeah. And so you said that when you then had your daughter, Carmen, that she has been really the big impetus of like, okay, I need to change the world. Did you know that as soon as you got pregnant, or that became a more of a thing once your sister passed away?
It was more when my sister passed away. I was so fully recovered by the time I got pregnant and had a beautiful, I had morning sickness for 6 months. So that was really interesting. I have to, actually stop and acknowledge that, because I really was very sick for 6 months. And so I was aware that this was complex for someone who had been bulimic, but it didn't trigger anything. And the funny part was I couldn't eat vegetables. That was what made me nauseous. And so I was eating foods like meat and greasy food. I couldn't get enough fat and grease in my body. And my mom was really wonderful during that time. And we would talk about it and just how the body needed what it needed. And so because I was so in tune with my body, I just gave it everything that it wanted. And to keep me from, it was a very intense time. But I had no problem with gaining weight. I gained a lot of weight. I felt so good about it. I was happy. I was so happy being pregnant and having a baby. And then even afterwards, I had none of that. Oh, I need my body back. I don't know if it was just a different time. It's really escalated now. It's horrible now, but I never had that. I need to fix my body to look a certain way. I just was in love with my baby and my family, and we just had this beautiful relationship together. So I was able to really ease back into whatever, never back to that body, but to whatever body was going to be my new mother's body. So so I was fine in terms of raising her and feeding her and everything. I felt comfortable. And then when Stephanie died, it was just this real wake up call of like, oh, maybe I'm not going to be able to do this. It sort of created some fear in me that maybe Carmen won't be safe because this is just what happens to girls, especially. And so that's when I just thought, I'm going to change the world.
Okay. And it's interesting you talking about you being pregnant and the kinds of foods you were craving. So I've got a 2.5-year-old, and when my other half went through pregnancy, for the first 3 or 4 months, all she wanted was like mac and cheese and like just stodge. And like, even if I put a salad on the table or vegetables on the table, she'd be like, you have to remove that from the table. Like, it is angering me. And I don't want to see any of this kind of food. And then at some point that just changed. And that was just the point that she was in. And she also gained a lot more weight than is kind of normal, and I use that in inverted commas. She was at the far end of the bell curve in terms of that, and then once it was over, it went back to normal. Like it was a really great illustration of how much the body does what it wants to do, and if you don't try and control it and you just go with it, it really will navigate you in the right way.
Yes, I'm so happy to hear that story. That makes me really, really happy, because I just feel that there's so much pressure on people who are pregnant to stay in that zone. And this is the zone of how much weight you can gain, and you should eat these foods and you must do this. And our bodies know what they want and need. And yes, listening to them and honoring them, and they go back to, finally, I was able to eat some vegetables later, but I couldn't eat broccoli ever through my pregnancy. I would even say the word and I would feel nauseous. And the funny part is that my daughter's favorite vegetable when she was little, and one of the only ones she really, really loved, was broccoli. And I just thought it cracked me up, because I could not go near it. And I love broccoli. It's one of my favorites. And I love vegetables. And I remember the moment I was sitting, and I was about 6 weeks pregnant, and I was eating this beautiful salad. And the day before, I had been able to eat the salad. And then I just sat and I looked down at it, and just like, your person in your life said, your mother of your child said, yeah, I can't take this away. And I just threw it in the garbage and was like, oh, never again. So,
yeah, but I know, and I do. I think there is, as you say, there is now so much pressure on women to get their pre-baby body back and all of this. And my heart goes out, because I'm like, you're missing out on the most precious time of being with this new human being, when you're now having to try and focus on, I need to reduce my calories, or I need to be upping my exercise, or whatever it may be, as opposed to just being in the moment.
Yeah. I have another story that's related around the body piece, around children and bodies. And my daughter, she was in 4th grade, and her teacher was a very large woman, this incredible human being. And my daughter and the teacher bonded in this just incredibly beautiful way. And one day Carmen came home, and I had picked her up, and she had her legs wrapped around me and had her head on my chest. And she said, "Mommy, it's so much more fun to hug Ms. Brown because she's squishy." And then she freaked out because she realized that she had said something that might hurt me. And I said, "I am with you on that. I love hugging Ms. Brown. She's so cozy. She is the coziest person." And then I had this moment to talk about genetics. And I said, this is who I am. I'm kind of bony on top. I have, more flesh on the bottom, but I've got kind of bony shoulders. And it's just the genetics of who we come from. And I am completely fine with you wanting to hug Ms. Brown and knowing that feels good to you. It was very sweet, because children they're not looking for their mom to be perfect in what they look like according to society's standards. They want a cozy mom.
Yeah. And I think, you handled that situation so well. And I think for so many people, there's that, A, the fear of saying the wrong thing, but B, because there's so much ingrained fat phobia and fear about being bigger or gaining weight or whatever, that any kind of comment like that from a child, even when it is from a place of neutrality or curiosity or whatever, that then the adult's lens gets put on to that comment, and they try and think, what's the right thing to say here?
Yes. For me, it always has been and always was letting her express herself and what she felt, with never taking that away. And there was another time when she was little, and she told me she loved her preschool teacher more than she loved me. And I just said, "That's wonderful. It's so great that you have all of these women in your life. And I'm so glad. I love Jen too. She's amazing." And again, she kind of freaked out. And then I just never added anything on there, because I knew she loved me, and I knew, and she needed to express herself. And so communication for me. And I think that I'd love to just tie the piece around communication with our children or with other people back to this intuitive piece. I think of myself as having learned intuitive communication as well, which is really owning my own stuff when I need to, but allowing people to be able to say what they need to say without, like, especially with my child, without having her have to feel like she has to take care of me, or that she can express these things and I can just feel it and feel how it sits. If there's something that hurts me, then yes, I'm going to say, "Ouch, that hurts." But in those cases, it was just she needed to express herself, and it wasn't personal. Yeah. And that's really important, I think.
Definitely. And so what were some of the other things that you did with Carmen when she was growing up? And this can be either when she was really just a little child, or even in her teenage years, to help her have a different trajectory than what you and your sister had.
Yes, many things. One was, I was lucky. There was really, we had internet and she had games and computer time, but it wasn't the same. She was born in 1991. And so we had limited screen time. She did have limited television time. And when she was young, very young, we chose not to have her watch commercial television. So seeing commercials. And this was a media literacy thing. It was pretty funny one day, because she would go to friends' houses and she would see things and watch cartoons and everything. And we had more of the public television shows for her. And she came home, and somehow she figured out the remote and got the commercial television. And she said, "Oh, look, we now get this channel." I was like, "Oh, look at that. We do." So a commercial came on, and it was this purple plastic pony. And she went crazy. "I want that. I want that." And she had a fit. She just had this huge tantrum wanting this purple pony. And after she calmed down, we turned the television off. And so we had this conversation about, this is what advertising is, and this is what it does to you. How do you feel right now? You feel, and she said, I feel awful. And then I said, so imagine if you had that thing, would you really actually would be interested in it for very long? And she said, no, I wouldn't. I realized that this is not something I need. And so we had this talk about, this is what advertising does to you. So that was one of the early media literacy things. One of her friends gave her Barbies. I chose not to buy them, but I didn't ban them from our house. My mom had actually banned us from having Barbies. I still got an eating disorder. It didn't make a difference. So, but she got it, I said, so I just want you to know, some girls feel like they're supposed to look like this. And then I did this really goofy, I stood on my tiptoes and said, if I had that much hair, I would actually fall backwards. And, so I did this sort of thing around pointing out that this is not a realistic body. And then just said, go play and have fun. And watching The Little Mermaid, having a conversation about The Little Mermaid is actually anorexic and she's given up her voice to get the man, and that's not okay with me. And having a conversation about how girls and women are portrayed in media, but then watching the movie and having fun with it and singing the songs together. So I did a lot of that where I do media literacy, but not make things bad.
Yeah.
And make her feel shame for wanting them. Same with magazines and all that stuff. We would talk about things. Billboards, when we were driving from Berkeley to San Francisco across the bay, and all these billboards at that time were all about clothes and really horrible imagery about women. And so she and her friends and I would have conversations and about that, but not in like, this is terrible and bad and don't do that. It was conversation to let them sort of explore what they were feeling about it.
Yeah.
And then with food, so when she was very young, she always had a wide variety of foods and she was never forced to eat anything. But we had something where we called it a no thank you bite. So if I noticed she was only eating certain foods on her plate, I'd say, hey, do you want some broccoli tonight? And she'd say, I don't know. And I'd say, well, why don't you take a no thank you bite? And so if she'd take a bite and then she could say, yes, I want more, or no, I don't want it. And then if she said, no, I don't want it, it didn't mean, no, you can't have dessert or anything like that. But sometimes she would say, oh yes, I want more. And then she'd just eat more and more and more of it. So, and then teaching her about foods and in a fun way, and about what foods helped her be able to climb trees and what foods helped her as she was learning to read in her brain. And so we did it in a really fun way. So there was nutrition education. It was just done in a lot of fun ways, and not, you need to eat that because it's good for you. Never, ever, ever did that.
Nice. And so, yeah, I mean, on the media literacy front, it sounds like you were talking to your daughter like, not like she was an adult, but actually having grown-up conversations, as opposed to sort of trying to dumb it down because she was just a child.
Yes. I will never forget when she was actually very small. I was at the pediatrician's office and I was talking to her as I talk to her always. And the pediatrician said, oh God, it just drives me crazy. Moms talk to their daughters like they think their daughters understand. And I was blown away because I thought, yes, she understands. And so for us, communication with honoring her intelligence all the way through and her wisdom, even as a little one, was really important to me. And I think children understand way more than we think. And the thing that is really hard for me is when parents say, just do this because I said so. I think that that's such a missed opportunity. For the only time I ever did that was when there was a danger or safety thing. And I would have a certain tone and I would say, this is a danger moment or this is a safety moment. And she would know, like, you listen to me, you do not question anything I say in this moment. And then I would explain afterwards why. But other than that, I explained everything to her.
Yeah. And that's, I mean, the approach that we're taking as well. And with Ramsey, my little one, he's really verbal. So even though he's 2.5, we can have proper conversations. And I think all kids understand probably the same degree that he does, that just don't speak as early as him in all cases. But there's stuff where he just is able to remember things. Where I was like, how are you able to remember this? And so it's been a real insight into, like there is a lot going on upstairs. And so it matters the way that he gets talked to, or the things that we focus on, and that you can have the kinds of conversations that you were talking about. And that, you don't have to think, oh, they're just a little kid. Let's dumb it down.
I'm so happy to hear that. I agree with you that children who aren't as verbal are still taking it in. I mean, they are taking in everything.
Yeah.
And I think the other thing about communication with children is that they are taking in the nonverbal as well. So how we are, and that's why it's so important for us as adults to have that embodied relationship ourselves, so that there's research to show that one person who is embodied in a child's life. And with embodiment, I say, that's being fully connected around all parts of our bodies, and with food and movement, but also with how we express ourselves and all the ways that we are connected to our bodies. So one person in a child's life can help that child grow up connected to their bodies. So for me, I knew that was key, was how I was in myself, and not just my relationship with my body, but at one point I realized a whole piece around self-love on a larger scale beyond my body. I was fine with my body, but I was still really mean to myself about other things and critical. And I realized, this is something that I'm going to role model as well. And so I had a concerted effort to change how I felt and do my work around building a practice of self-love. With all of this, there's no perfection. There's going to be days when we don't like our bodies, and there's going to be days when we're mean to ourselves. But overall, can we have an overarching sense of how can I love myself more? Because that is also translated into all people, whether I don't have children or not. If I'm just relating to other people, the more I love myself, the more I am a role model and show others that this is possible.
And what was there anything that really influenced that in terms of, this book really helped me, or this movement really helped me, for you to be able to get to that place?
No, it wasn't from the outside. It was more from the inside. Most of my work is done. I mean, I read things and I get information from others, obviously. But a lot of it comes from some sort of deep place inside. I still have this intuitive self that's very powerful and strong and speaks to me all the time. But this one came, I was actually at that point, the Body Positive was going, and I was working with a group of teenagers, and I was sitting in a meeting with them, and they were talking about each one of them, how they were working to love their bodies. And I realized, okay, I've gotten through that part, but I have this mean side, and it's no different. So I have work to do. And I said it out loud to them. And they were so grateful, because many of them said, I thought I was going to get to this place in adulthood where I was going to be basically perfect in my love for myself. And that there's you grow up to be perfect because all adults are perfect and they've figured everything out. And I said, nope, that's not the case. So let me role model imperfection to you, and let me role model someone who's going to be growing for the rest of my life and learning. And it was a really big moment for me and for them too, and made me realize that in teaching and in working with others, it's so powerful just to be ourselves and to speak our insecurities and to be vulnerable, because that's really how people are able to then see themselves in a way where they know that they can do the work too.
Yeah. And so did your conversations with your daughter, has there always just been this real openness that you guys have had?
Yes. We definitely started talking the minute she was born, and we've been open ever since. We're still really close. I mean, we had moments, her first year of college, she came home and she was really needing separation from me, and that was fine. And again, with the not taking it personally, I think, yes, it was hard in moments, but I didn't take it in personally, and it didn't last long. And then I realized that I had said something to her about how I said, it's weird because I'm really not a mom anymore. And I didn't mean that I wasn't her mom. It just meant that there was this, after she left home, there was this big space in my brain where I wasn't thinking about her schedule or she'd eaten, or so I had this sort of whole self again of thinking about other things, and that's what I had meant, but it didn't come out right. And she was really hurt, and a year later we realized that she was hurt by that. And I said, so we were able to reconnect at that point. I said, I am always and forever your mom and want to be with you, and it's just that that was I misspoke, and so it shows how communication can not go well and what happened. But we got through it, and we talked, and she needed separation anyway. I mean, that's natural too. So, but we're very close.
Okay, nice. So look, I want to now spend a bit of time talking about the Be Body Positive model, and going through the different competencies as part of that, and what each of them mean, what you cover as part of them when you're doing workshops or as part of your book, and then just any practical suggestions that the listeners can then implement. So
wonderful.
First competency is reclaim health. So what does this mean? What do you cover as part of this?
Reclaim health is about, first of all, looking at who we come from, who our ancestors are, how they live in our bodies in terms of our body shape and size, all things about our bodies, and then also including our health. So what we've inherited from all of those people who came before us, how this body really is part of a lineage of people. So really looking at that and seeing who we are. And in this culture, because of so much pressure to be a certain shape and size. So how can we honor who we genetically come from? And then we are looking at helping people become the expert of their own health. So learning about health at every size, learning how to unlink weight and health from each other, learning how to see what messages we have gotten from the external world about how we are supposed to be in our bodies, and really using our minds. This is the mind part of it, and breaking down mythology around what we are supposed to do in our lives to be healthy. So that's really what Reclaim Health is all about.
And when you were coming up with all of these competencies, where was health at every size at that stage? Because I'm just thinking, I mean, if this is going back to 1996, was health at every size even formed at that stage?
No, it wasn't. There was no name for it, but there was a movement. So I had met a lot of the people who started the Health at Every Size movement. So there was a group of mostly women in the San Francisco Bay Area who were working on issues around fat liberation and working to try and change the medical world. And so I was part of that community in terms of really coming in as an ally and coming in as someone who was interested as well in making change. And social justice is a huge part of the Body Positives work. And so social justice for fat people was a big piece of that Reclaim Health competency. And so, but then Health at Every Size became a name. And so then that made it easier. And then Linda Bacon's book was published, and then that made it even easier. So, but I mean, I was talking to doctors all during those years and trying to explain and why, especially people who are working with young ones, why this isn't working, to try and make everyone fit. So it was a challenge. Yeah.
And in terms of like the mental health piece, is that a big component as well?
Yes. And so reclaiming our health on all levels. I think all of our work is honoring that we deserve help. So if we need help externally, saying, yes, I deserve to get help, let me find it. So in that case, helping people find health at every size and size positive and size inclusive practitioners, whether it's a therapist or someone who's dealing with physical issues. So yes, definitely. I mean, finding, because so many therapists, if a larger person comes into their practice and they say, I'm unhappy, then they help them lose weight, that they think that that's helping them. And that's not the case. So we are always trying to encourage people to find body positive therapists and practitioners. And just backing up about the model and all of the competencies, it's a feminist dialogical model. So in the early days, we based it on the work I was talking about embodiment earlier, the research. Neva Perron is a Canadian researcher, and she, at the time when we were first starting, had started doing this work with girls with eating disorders in a ballet school or something. And so the question was, what are the messages you're getting? How do those messages make you feel? And what are you going to do about that? And how can we support you? So really helping people be able to see what's going on, how they feel, and then how they want to change their environments, and then how we can support. And so we just started asking questions and talking with people of all backgrounds. And then that's how we came to, there are these 5 competencies that we think people can really support people in having a more peaceful relationship with their body.
Sure. And was this, so am I getting the impression right that when you were first putting this together, it was very much aimed at teenagers and with the framework or the questions being like, okay, what is most relevant for them? Or was it from the beginning also more broad and appropriate for all age levels?
Well, I think the question, because the work is the same for all ages. I mean, even for young ones through the very elderly, the questions really are all the same. And so we were working a lot with teenagers at that time. And yet then we were expanding out to work with college students. And then and I was working in companies and doing body positive work for in corporate settings in some cases. And Elizabeth had her clients that she was working with of all ages. And so it really came from a very broad group of people, the questions, and seeing really what everybody needed. And the interesting thing is always, I remember this one day where I went from speaking to 7th grade girls in one of the most affluent areas where I live, to speaking at a free drug rehab center for women who were coming from very, different backgrounds from these girls. And the conversation was the same, exactly the same. It was really fascinating.
Wow. I mean, that's a really good example of just how this cuts through everything.
Yes.
And so you mentioned around this first competency, like pointing people towards health at every size. Is there other advice or practical suggestions you would have if someone was like, okay, I want to better be doing this?
Yes, I think that, first of all, one of the things that we talk about, one of the activities we do for this is figuring out one's body story. So really taking time to look at the messages that we have gotten early on, and how then those have from all the different places in our lives, not just from media, but from friends and family and doctors and perhaps churches and religious groups and all the different places we get messages, and then how those impacted how we live in our bodies now, and what are we getting now? What are the messages that we get now? And then I always think about, how have I internalized those messages, and how do I then give those messages to myself, and which ones are helpful and which ones are not helpful. And then from there, going to, where do I want to go with this relationship with my body, and what are the sort of, we think of it as a tree or a flower, and how do I want to blossom into this more peaceful, joyful relationship with my body? So the body story is really important in this part of reclaiming health. And as said, mental and physical health.
And I'm from reading through your work, I kind of get the impression that the stories are relevant, though, through all of the different competencies.
Yes, our work is all about storytelling. So, that's really important to point out, because that's why it works for all people. We are not telling anyone how they should live their lives, and we don't have any idea how someone should live their life. But what we are saying is, you are the author of your own story. Your story, we are going to listen to your story in an open, curious place. Your story, your life experience is your own, and there is no right or wrong with that. And so then, where are the obstacles to having better physical health or better mental health? What are those obstacles? And then how can we support you in finding ways to remove those obstacles? So that's where it is, because people say, well, what about for someone who's trans, or what about someone who is this or that? And so because it is each human being's own story, it works. And then these are tools, and take or leave them, see how they work for you. How our work looks at the end for each human is as individual as every single person who takes it on.
Yeah. Nice. And so then competency 2, so practice intuitive self-care.
So this is where we come into the body. So we've gone from mind and now we're in body. And this is the listening piece. This is learning how to listen deeply to our intuitive wisdom. It's trial and error and trial and success, and seeing how that works. And so saying, okay, so in terms of food, an example would be, what do I want? What do I really, really want? And taking the time to listen and figure out, what is it that I am craving? What is it that I'm really needing? And then getting as close to that as one can, and honoring one's life circumstances. So whether it's a student in school or someone living at home and not being able to control their food, or someone who doesn't have the resources, but in whatever way possible, how can you get as close to that as you can? And then afterwards, how do I feel? And that's the key piece. People say so much, oh, well, if I just listened to my body, I would only eat junk food, or I would only eat Snickers bars. I heard someone say once, and it's like, well, if you continue to do this feedback loop, how do I feel? Your body is going to be craving other things. And so yes, you're using your mind, but ultimately, what do I want? How can I have that? And then afterwards, how do I feel? With everything, with a relationship, with movement, with food, with rest, with all of the things in our lives, just this coming into really doing the work to listen and taking time whenever possible. And it's not always possible, but taking time when we can to really sit with our bodies and quiet into that place of figuring out what we know.
Yeah. And I think your comment there around, oh, if I just listen to what I want, I'm going to eat nothing but Snickers bars. Or if you extend it out, like if I just listen to my body, I'm never going to get off the sofa and all that. That to me just speaks to where someone's thoughts are within that moment, or to their probably dieting behavior, or it just doesn't really map onto reality, because I don't know, pick your favorite food and have it every single meal for a number of days, and within that short amount of time, you're probably going to get sick of it.
Right, exactly. Right.
And same with like, don't move your body for a really long time, and where there is no one putting pressure on you to move it, and eventually you're like, you know what, I kind of want to move my body.
Right.
And so I do think that a lot of people's knee-jerk reactions or instant thoughts around why this doesn't work speaks more to their beliefs than reality.
Yes, I agree with you. And I know there's some conversation now about how intuitive eating doesn't work for marginalized groups. And I understand where that's coming from. And I also I think it's this idea of what does intuitive mean. I think that that's what we have to look at, and how that word is used. To me, the word intuitive means it's my connection. I know when someone's had trauma, it's harder to listen. And I want to really honor that with all of this work, that it's way harder to listen to our bodies and follow them if we've had trauma. So this is very important. And I do believe that the goal is to be then saying, I've had trauma, I'm struggling with learning how to listen, I can't figure out how to do that, I can't do it. That person, you deserve help. So how can we then create support systems for people everywhere to be able to get the help they need to heal from the trauma and get to that listening place? And it will take longer, most likely, and it's still worth the process. And with intuition, there is somewhere deep inside of us where we have that knowing. There is a knowing there of what is my own life. So my own knowing, my own unique knowing, my whatever we want to call it, of this is my life, and there is that place inside. So how can we get help to keep peeling off the layers to be able to get there?
Yeah. And I think people misunderstand intuition, where, I don't know, it gets this like really, like there's only one layer to it. Whereas I think there's a lot of things that then can come into play with this when you're making a decision. I talked with Elise Resch around this, of like, there will be times when you don't feel hungry, but it's still intuitive to eat some food because you realize, I'm not hungry because I'm under stress and it's been a really long time since I've had something to eat. So even if I'm not necessarily feeling hunger, I know that I'm probably going to do better after eating some food.
Yes.
And there may be times where I feel like X food, but I actually know that the last 5 times I've eaten X food, I just haven't felt great. So I'm not going to have that food on this occasion. And so I think sometimes intuitive eating almost feels like in people's minds of like, you're offering cake to a 3-year-old every single time, and they're not gonna think about any other things about, rather than just how is this going to taste on my lips.
Yes. And in that moment. And the interesting thing is, if you have a 3-year-old who's never been restricted, they might eat the cake and then they might not. Totally. Elizabeth's daughter, I love this story. She said she remembers picking her up from school one day, and she felt she bought her like a candy bar or something. And she felt so good, like, here's this nice reward. And her daughter, Uma, looked at her and said, Mama, I need something to nourish me. and her bedtime snack that she always wanted was like fennel and raw fennel and all these vegetables and carrots and things. That's what she wanted because she'd never had restriction. Not that every child's going to do that, but that was her thing. And my nephew was so sweet, from the son of my sister who died. And then my niece and nephew moved in with my parents, and they were over their natural weight because their father hadn't taken care of them. And he then died. And so when they moved in with my parents, my dad was wanting them to lose weight, and they wanted to lose weight thinking that would feel better, which they needed to have changes in their lives around their diet and movement, but it wasn't about their weight. So I came up, I talked to them about what it's like to live with your grandpa around food. He's got his own eating issues. Your mom died because she went to Weight Watchers, so you are not going to Weight Watchers. And I so started this whole thing. And then my nephew really just healed so beautifully and had this beautiful relationship with his body. And one day he was visiting a friend, or he was staying out of town with friends for a week. And the woman, the mother of this boy, was feeding them really crappy food, just all fast food. And then their home meal was, I don't know, something put in the microwave and no vegetables. And so Bill said he left early because he wanted to go home for one of grandma's salads. So his body was craving vegetables. And so that was a teenage boy. I mean, that shows that our bodies know what they want. And yes. And then we do use our brains. I mean, that's the whole thing. I think people think intuitive eating means you never used your senses, other senses.
Yeah.
And so it's important to bring that in.
Yeah, definitely. And look, maybe using the example of a 3-year-old in front of cake was the wrong example, because I had a similar thing happen, I think yesterday or the day before. Ramsey and Ali, my partner, had spent the afternoon making banana bread, and like he just loves banana bread. And I then came down, I was like, why is there a piece of banana bread on this plate with like one bite out of it? And she was like, oh, he had a piece and then asked for another piece, and then he had one bite out of it and he was done. Just because he kind of knew that he'd had enough.
Yes. Isn't that great? I mean, that's the whole thing. It's so funny. My daughter's partner, Chelsea, was telling me recently that when she first met Carmen, someone had sent Chelsea a box of chocolates or something, and Carmen had taken a bite of one and then put it back. And Chelsea had never seen anybody do anything like that. And she said, why didn't you finish it? And Carmen said, because I didn't want the rest of it. And that was the first time Chelsea was aware of this whole idea of listening, that our bodies know exactly what they want. And so she's had a blast really learning about all this stuff. And we talk a lot about, we're going to do actually a project together around intuitive living, because she's just taken it on, and it's so fun to see how someone's life can be changed in that way.
Yeah. And I know this then also connects to the movement that you were talking about earlier on, in terms of like joyful movement and being self-aware to know the kinds of movement that you enjoy, and enjoying just getting your body out, as you talked about, in nature, for the right reasons.
Yes. And the interesting thing, and this is what I struggle with in the school setting, is how children of all body types are expected to be able to run an 8-minute mile. Oh my God, so horrible. It's torture for some people. And why not let others do yoga or be in a pool or figure out what movement works for them? And the whole physical education system in school just makes it impossible for some young people to ever be able to physically enjoy movement.
Yeah, definitely. And it's so just random in terms of what we value in terms of the body being able to do. Like I as a kid, when I was at school, was always like tiny. And yes, I could run and play sports, but if we valued being able to lift heavy weights, then I would be the most undervalued person when I was at school, because I was tiny and I couldn't do any of that. And I was just lucky to live in a society that didn't value that. Otherwise, my experience would have been very different. And that's not because of anything that I did. It's just because of the system.
Yes. And I think what also happens is the play and the fun is taken out of it all.
Yeah.
When Carmen was in middle school, she would come home and say, oh, I hated PE today. We had to run around the whole school, and I had asthma, so I had to walk. And then I felt awful because I was the last one. And so I had this opportunity because I was working with the school around body positive work. And so I told that story, and the PE teacher was there. And so I said, think about this. Maybe next time, have them play tag. Create a game where they're running. They have to run everywhere, but it's a game. And I never said a word to Carmen. She came home the day that happened, and she said, "Oh my God, PE was so fun today. We played tag, and I ran, and I had no asthma."
Yeah,
and that just showed me right there that something's wrong with the system, and we can change it for children. And yeah, I mean, she had a completely different experience, and even a physically different experience because she had no asthma.
Wow. That reminds me, in a slightly different setting, but reminds me of a story. The guy called Alfie Cohen, who has written a lot about child education, and was talking about a teacher who had this, I think it was a girl in his class who just was really struggling, and he's like, oh, she just can't remember anything, and then had her in the car taking her somewhere. I don't understand. I can't remember how it was, but then for the 20-minute ride she was able to sing every word of every song that came on the radio. And there was this light bulb moment of, okay, something is going on here, because it's not that this girl can't learn, it's because the setting is not right, because she's clearly able to remember lots of things.
Yes. I love that. It's so true. And yes, I understand that education systems have to have some form of structure, but I think that if there's a way to allow these different types of learning to happen, even within that setting, that it could change. I mean, you think about how much it could change human life.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also connected to this competency, and I know this comes through in terms of your book as well, like pleasure being like a guiding principle for much of this work, and maybe at the other end of that spectrum is shame. So do you want to just talk about how pleasure fits in?
Yes. So it was really fun when I learned actually that physiologically pleasure has always been for us as humans a sign of knowing when we are, how that created humans to be able to go out and find the food, but then knowing when it's time to stop is because the pleasure actually diminishes in eating the food. And so using pleasure as a guide in terms of knowing what and how much of something is really powerful. So with your son, that last bite, the pleasure was after that was gone, and he knew just instinctively that that's when to stop. And so for me, I think that pleasure has gotten such a bad rap, and it's connected with overindulgence. Yeah. And so this idea of I'm going to have pleasure, and so I'm just going to forget anything else, and I'm just going to overconsume, whether, or over whatever it is. And then that's not pleasure anymore. And I know when I was bulimic, that first bite of the binge would be like, oh, this is so pleasurable. But then overeating to the point of, just being sick was not pleasurable. And so for me, what I learned was pleasure is something, when I'm really listening, that, pleasure allows me to know what works and what doesn't work for my body. And just allowing pleasure and movement and taking away all of these rules and all of the stuff that we put on ourselves that because of the messages that we've gotten from others of it's supposed to be hard work and this, and it's just makes me sad. And I think also for me, the piece around pleasure, just having had a sister die at such a young age and knowing that I want to have as much pleasure while I'm on the planet as possible, and learning what that means for me, what is pleasurable for me.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also this connects back into what we were talking about with people's diety thoughts around food. Like, you can get pleasure from eating cake, you can get pleasure from eating a salad, you can get pleasure from lots of different things. And I think it's people's relationship with food and constantly being on a diet that has meant that if they think of pleasure, it is in this very narrow band.
Yes. And so either I'm being good or bad. And I think this piece around good and bad, and I'm being good, therefore I'm not eating that food. But now I'm going to give myself pleasure and be bad, and I'm going to eat as many chocolates as I want instead of really tasting that chocolate or whatever it is. Because I think that's the key, is when we are pleasure focused, we're using all of our senses as we eat. I have a great example. That company I was working at, one of the women, I remember her saying, it was one of the last days I was there, she said, I've got this intuitive eating thing down, except for with chocolate covered almonds. I just can't stop eating them. So we were standing at her desk, and she had this box of chocolate covered almonds, and she was just shoving them in her mouth and crunching and swallowing just as fast as she could. So I said, okay, stop for a minute. Just take one of them, just one almond, and put it in your mouth. Don't chew it. Just suck on it. So now think about what and taste and feel what it's like to let the chocolate be melting in your mouth and mixing with your saliva. And what is that sensation like? Okay, when you're ready, now crunch it. Now listen to the crunching sound and feel the crunch and the mixing of the nut with the melting chocolate. And so I took her through this whole sensual experience, and I was like, okay, now swallow it. All right. Now, what was that like? And she got it. It was like, oh, wow. Okay. Have a relationship. If this is all about relationship with food and movement, if we just are doing it without consciousness, and sometimes we have to when we're eating, and I want to honor that too. Like if you're on the run and you have to get some food and just eat the food and go. But when we have this opportunity to have the sensual experience, it really changes things. And we are then very aware of what's going into our bodies and how it feels and how it digests, and it helps the learning process.
Yeah. And I think counterintuitively you would think, oh, if you're eating the almonds in that way and trying to maximize pleasure, that you're going to end up eating more of them. But that's actually definitely not the case.
Right. Exactly.
Because there's that level of awareness. And I had a client once who we were going through a similar kind of process. And so she then went out and just bought the most amazing chocolates with like these phenomenal truffles. And she then would be like, and I would end up just having one some nights, where she like, and I'd really pay attention and enjoy it. And then that was it. I didn't need it any more than that, because I was present and in the moment and really tasted it. And I knew that actually just one of them was enough. And this isn't to say that the whole point of this is so that you eat less or that you have smaller amounts. It's to say like, how can you enjoy that experience the most which typically translates into you work out the point where it's now no longer pleasurable.
Right. And then that's that satisfaction point. So instead of eating to that perfect point of fullness, you're eating to satisfaction. Sometimes that might be slightly over fullness. Sometimes that might be slightly under. But in each of those moments, you have that knowing. And I think the other key piece about all of this is with the good, bad, and I'm being good or bad is that I'm going to eat this now because I'm never going to have it again. Or I'm going to go on my diet tomorrow. So then therefore I need more now. And when I was healing from my eating disorder, one of the things I would ask myself is, do I want this now? I can have it later. So do I want this extra, maybe I've had 2 or 3 cookies and maybe I'm thinking I want a 4th or something, or however many it was. Do I want this now? I know I can have it later. Oh, I can have it later. That would be fine. That would be great. My mom was a respiratory therapist. And when she was teaching people how to quit smoking, she would ask them, can you wait until later to have this? And then so then they could say yes. And then maybe then way more time would go by than they thought for that cigarette. And so for me, it was like knowing I was never restricted from anything and I could have anything whenever I wanted it. I didn't have to overeat in the moment to that point of not having pleasure and feeling uncomfortable. Because I don't like feeling uncomfortable. I don't want to be uncomfortable in my body. And I do sometimes because I'm loving food, but I overall, I don't want to feel uncomfortable in my body.
Yeah. And so then the next competency is cultivate self-love. So talk a little about this.
Yes. Cultivate self-love is what really makes all of this work. And this is this whole piece around heart. I mean, to really develop this relationship with ourselves that is based on the awareness that each one of us has this incredible purpose and value and why we are here, and that we deserve to be loved, and that building a practice of self-love allows us, and working with the critical voice and honoring the fear that we have and turning towards it instead of rushing away from it, allows us to be able to take risks in the world, to be able to just have that place of peace. I think of my self-love as allowing me to have a safe place to come home to in myself, because it's really hard being out in the world sometimes and it's painful. And if I'm beating myself up all the time, then I have no safe place. I have an abusive home, and that's in my mind. And so, and in my body too. And so for me, this practice of building self-love is really where I feel like that is my only protection in the world.
And is this are there particular competencies that people struggle with more than others? Like it feels like this may be more difficult than others for most.
Well, it's interesting because people think that this one is the crux of all of them. And so being able to get this makes intuitive eating so much easier, because trial and error means you're going to have error. I mean, we're not always going to have trial and success. So trial and error and having self-love allows us to forgive ourselves when we quote unquote make mistakes and when we fall down. And so this is a piece. And so we do a lot of work of helping people understand the critical voice, what it is, how it's how it's just fear. And I do a lot of teaching around how it's just this little child inside of us, and how the child is having a tantrum because it wants to be listened to, and it's trying to protect us in some way. It's trying to be heard. And if we just say, oh, shut up, then just as I communicated with my child, that's not going to work. So communicating with my own little self and say, what's going on with you? What are you afraid of? Let's have a conversation about this. And then doing a practice where we get down to ultimately what I was, I'm looking for in X critical voice is, oh, I'm really needing validation right now, or, oh, I'm really needing extra, security right now, or safety, or I want to feel calm right now. And so the voice is telling me something's going on that is stopping me from finding that life enhancing quality that I really need. But if if I don't listen to it, it's just going to get louder and it's going to keep beating me. If I turn to it and say, okay, I'm not going to let you be talking to me like this, but let's have a conversation. What's really going on? Then I can actually do the work that I need to do with myself. Like, wow, I have been not feeling validated. Okay, how can I get validation in my life? Or how can I have a more discretion, or whatever it is, like whatever that quality is. How can I feel more beautiful right now? How can I feel more love right now? All these really life-enhancing qualities. How can we use the critical voice to get there and then quiet it? Like the subtitle of my book, Quiet That Critical Voice. So it doesn't run the show, but we're not trying to cut them out of us. So it's not the easiest practice, and it is practice. So it's not something to perfect.
And are there people that have really, or people or books or movements or whatever that's really impacted upon you coming up with this competency? Like I'm thinking of self-compassion and people like Chris Sandel or other things that have made you have a better understanding around this.
Yeah, Chris Sandel's work is wonderful and really backs up what we're teaching. She calls it self-compassion. We've chosen to call it self-love. I love the word love, and I want to, it's interesting. There's a self-love movement that's really, I think, in some ways, people will say, I keep hearing I'm supposed to love myself, but I can't do that. And her work is beautiful. Elizabeth is a Buddhist scholar, and so a lot of our work comes from her teachers, especially this piece around turning towards the fear and turning towards the critical voice, and then pouring the quality that we find that we actually need into us. So a lot of that comes from Buddhist study. I also love Rick Hanson's work around taking in the good, and that's been really powerful as well.
Okay. And one thing we haven't chatted about yet, but obviously you named your company a very long time ago, and now that has taken on a very different feel in terms of body positivity. And one of the big gripes of that is, okay, this used to be a movement that was about changing society, and now we're told we have to love ourselves. And so I'm just wondering, is there ever any pushback when people just look at this one at surface level and think, hang on, what are you trying to tell me to do?
Yes. And a lot of people, so then there's also the body neutrality movement now, saying body positivity is too hard. So I'd love to just take a moment to say the body positive isn't related to everything in the world that is body positivity. In fact, It just sort of spun off and with the internet and just like went full on in many directions. And so a lot of people are arguing about what it is and who it's for. And our version of the body positive is it, as I said earlier, because it's about each individual story, it's for everyone. And it's not about, I love myself and I love my body and I always feel positive. It's finding this overarching sense and awareness of who I am and where that I have purpose and value and deserve to be loved. Yeah. And now I'm going to do the work of being a human, which means I will have suffering. There will be suffering. There is no perfection in this. But how can I be aware of my connection with my body, aware of this body that gives me life, and how can I create a relationship with it? That honoring that it is my primary relationship, and that I choose to have a nonviolent communication with it, and choose, this is how I see it, as choose to not be abusive and not have an abusive relationship. And that is my commitment to myself. I make a commitment, and then I am responsible for my own life, and responsibility in a beautiful way of being able to respond, the ability to respond to what's in front of me. And how can I do that as much as possible with more love and more kindness and more gentleness? So it's a practice for sure. And it's not something that is, I think the problem with a lot of the social media part of this is it's all still really stuck in the head. And when we're talking now about Cultivate Self-Love, we're talking about the heart, and then we were talking about the body. So it's this it's beyond just thinking. It's feeling, and it's moving into that place of connecting with something larger than ourselves. If somebody feels comfortable with that, it's this sense of, who am I in this interconnected web of the entire world?
Yeah. Definitely. And I think, like, as I hear you describe all this, I'm like, this is amazing, and I'm completely on board with it. I do imagine, though, that just seeing the word cultivate self-love could bring up some connotations of what people expect that is meant to mean.
Yes, I'm sure they do. And so, yeah. One of the things, I actually wrote a blog about this, because people say, I can accept myself, but I can't love myself.
Yeah.
And so I had this moment. I was driving down the road one day, and it just clicked in me, and I thought, oh, wow, okay, I think it's the opposite for me, especially. I love my body for giving me life. I love my body because I am still here, and I feel very grateful to be here, especially, as I said before, having my sister die. I feel really lucky to have a life, and I'm lucky I made it through my eating disorder, and I'm lucky to have survived. Okay, I don't always accept myself. I am an aging woman. I'm going to be 60. My body is changing every day, and I look down, or I look in the mirror, and I'm like, whoa, what happened there? And because of societal imprinting, I have in me this, somewhere deep inside, the message that an aging body is ugly. So I have to do my work every single day to accept what is happening to me. Do I love myself? Absolutely. Do I love my body? Yes, I do, because that's life. That is life. Yeah. Acceptance comes after that, and acceptance is bloody hard sometimes. And for me, love is easier than acceptance. So the body neutrality piece of, I will accept myself and I'll be neutral. I think that I hope for people that they can see it as the opposite, that love, how do I love a friend? How do I love my child? How do I love my partner, if I have one? How do I love a parent? Or, maybe I don't, but finding that person that you unconditionally love, or a being, or a pet. What does that feeling of giving unconditional love to somebody else feel like? Now imagining that coming into us, and that practice of continually bringing that back to us is where we go.
Nice. And yeah, I mean, the way you've explained it there is beautiful. And I think, to me, just shows the power and the importance of language and words, and that two people can have very different takes on the exact same word, and the way that you feel about love is possibly the way that someone feels about acceptance, and vice versa.
Right. And the thing is, I mean, I say all this, and with all of our work, I am so not attached to how people choose to do it. I think what I struggle with is people saying body positivity doesn't work. This works, that doesn't work. And I kind of get tired of that, because it's creating a hierarchy of the words. And that bothers me, I have to say. It bothers me when people are all fighting about, this works for it, this doesn't work, this works. It's like, how do you know? I don't know what works for anybody. I'm not saying that what we're teaching, and neither is Elizabeth, saying that this is right for everybody. I am so not attached to how people live their lives and what they choose. But I think that it's like, let's focus on ourselves more and what works, and offer people ideas and tools, and then let them take them and go from there and make decisions for themselves and what works. And then people are going to get much more quickly towards healing. So, I mean, I think that what works for everybody is great. So I get sad, I think, that when people get stuck and say they can't love themselves, that makes me sad. So I hope people can go and see that being neutral is, yes, that's great. And love is possible, that there's a belief that love is not possible. And I believe love and self-love is possible for all humans. And I think it's worth it. And in my book, I talk about Jean-Jacques Rousseau's work around the difference between amour propre, which is the type of self-love defined in the dictionary, which is all about conceit and competition and comparison and selfishness. And then he talks about amour de soi, which is this it's a quality that all beings and animals, every being on the planet needs in order to thrive and to survive. It's a self-preservation, and it has nothing to do with comparing or contrasting or hierarchy. It's that I need self-love in order to thrive and survive, and every animal on the planet does. And that's, to me, the definition of self-love that is powerful, because yes, I mean, to truly thrive and to actualize our life purpose and to be able to live as fully as possible, that's deep. I mean, that's what I'm hoping people can see and go for.
Yeah.
The planet needs that in each of us.
Definitely. And yeah, I agree with everything you're saying here. And I think hearing you be able to then talk about it, I think is then helpful for people. So they understand, okay, what this really means.
Great. Thank you for asking. I'm loving that we can go deep into this conversation. It's helpful than like just skimming the surface of it.
Yeah. And so then competency 4, so declare your own authentic beauty. So what does this mean? What does this look like?
So this is coming back to the ancestor piece again, and being able to see our ancestors as they show up in our beauty in our bodies, and whether someone knows their ancestors or not, if they've been adopted, whether maybe a lot of the young people we work with don't really like their ancestors that they know in the moment. So imagining all the way back to those first humans, who are your people? Who do you come from? And how do they live in your bodies? Or creating your own community. I was working with someone who identifies as queer, saying that they created their own family, their own ancestry, and imagined those people, whether they were biologically related or not, who come through and live in their bodies and help them express their beauty. And so this idea that if we start our definition of beauty with ourselves, we take ourselves out of the beauty hierarchy. So I'm not saying I'm beautiful, meaning I'm conceited about it. It's just that deep sense of beauty that is a need for all humans. Again, just as this need for love is there for thriving, humans need beauty. How can we, again, with a word too, how can we shift the definition of beauty to be something so expansive and ever changing and dynamic that allows us to be part of that definition? And then that allows me to see beauty everywhere in the world. I am not in competition with others to have beauty or not have enough. And so I see so much beauty in people and everything around me. There's more light because I've chosen to add myself to my definition of beauty.
Yeah, which I think is so important, because we have such narrow standards of what is talked about as beauty or as cultural ideals. When, as you say, if you expand it out, you can see this in so many other places. And as you say, like, that's so important.
Yes, it is. And this is so much fun. And in our work and in our workshops and in our courses online and everything, this whole piece around really exploring beauty and being able to say it out loud when we're with people, or even I just did a meeting yesterday where we got to do it through a Zoom call, and there were a group of us, and each person, we go through an activity, and then each person saying my beauty is after doing this activity. And just, you could even feel more light from the computer of everybody feeling lifted up. Elizabeth, my colleague, talks about just this beautiful piece around, she says, so when we meditate on our flaws in the morning, that then we go through our whole day searching for flaws in others. And when we meditate on our own, and what a horrible practice that is, right? Why would we want to start our day meditating on what our flaws are? So if we can start our day meditating on our own beauty and seeing beauty in ourselves just as we are, doesn't mean, with that same thing around acceptance, it's not going to be perfect, but if we can see our value and see ourselves and see, I love to think about when I'm in alignment with my spirit and my soul and my body, that it's all expressed through my body. So I can have internal beauty, but I also believe that it's important to feel my external beauty, because that's how I express my internal beauty. It comes through my body. And so when I'm in alignment, it's energy. It's not about what I look like. It's about the energetic field that I'm putting out. And it's sometimes there and it's sometimes not. But I know when I'm in alignment that there is an energy around me that is people can be attracted to. And I don't always want that. And so I can shut it down or turn it on. But it's so attraction is not about what I look like. It's about choosing when I want to attract people to me or shut them out. So it's kind of a different way of looking at it.
Yeah. And it's interesting, just the comment around where do you start the day looking for flaws or start it looking for beauty? I mean, if we're talking about this purely in the body realm, I do an exercise often with clients of getting them to go from head to toe, every body part. What are their thoughts around those parts? And what invariably happens is there's parts they like, there's parts they're neutral about, and there's parts that they dislike. Mm-hmm. And when I'm always like, so where do you put all of your focus? And it is on the things that they don't like. I'm like, okay, it's not that big a surprise that you feel the way that you do around your body, and just starting to look at, okay, how could you be shifting your focus so that you're focusing on the things that you do like? And this is obviously just specific about body, but it can be about all areas of life.
Yes. I love that, because one of the things too is I need, for me also, my thighs were probably a big part of my eating disorder when I was young. I was teased about the size of my thighs. They're strong. They were athletic. I mean, I look back and I see pictures and I think, oh my God, I'm so sad that I hated them. Now they're aging. And so I made peace with my thighs, and I had this beautiful relationship at the age of 55. So almost 5 years ago, I was on the street, and this woman I was standing between lanes of traffic and a median and trying to get across. And this woman rolls by in her car with her window up and said, "You shouldn't wear shorts like that with legs that look like yours." Oh. And it really was hard, because I had made peace with my thighs. And then I looked down and I went, oh my God, they are changing. The texture of them is changing. They have lumps on them, and they're not perfectly smooth skin. And my muscles aren't perfectly toned. And it was really, really hard. And so I kept it inside for a long time. And then I didn't say anything to anybody. I was back doing a speaking engagement in the town where I grew up, where I really had my eating disorder and was obsessively running and hated my thighs. And so I was getting ready for that speaking engagement, and I was looking through some of my poetry, and I found this poem I wrote about the lake that I love, and how in the afternoon when the wind comes up, the lake is ripply, and there are the light shines off those ripples and creates these diamond sparkles. I mean, it's just the most beautiful thing. And I looked down at my thighs and I saw the ripply texture of the lake. And I now, whenever I look at them and I start to see ugliness, I stop and I stay with them. So I stay with the parts that I struggle with. And then I think, oh, think of the diamond sparkles. And I see my legs as the ripply surface of the lake, which I just love. I love ripples on water. It's so beautiful. And then imagining that light that can shine off of me, and it changes how I perceive them. And it allows me to have acceptance and working on the love for them because of their texture now. So that helps me a lot. And same with my neck. I think of nature all the time. My neck, I'm getting layers and lines and wrinkles in my neck, and I see it as the rings of a tree and in the core of the tree, and how it's just showing the years that I've been living on the planet.
Which touches back into something you talked about earlier on in terms of the stories that we tell ourselves. And this is part of the exercise when I get clients to do this. I'm like, okay, the bits that you don't like, can you imagine that there is someone who has that same body part that looks the exact same who actually really enjoys it? And how are they able to do that? What are they telling themselves? What are they focusing on? And I remember having a conversation with Ali my partner, after she had the baby, and her stomach now looks different than it did before. And I was like, how do you feel about it? How do you think about it? And she's like, I love it. Like I now get to remember that was where I grew a human being. Yes. And it was just such a great response. And it just really showed me that there could be a client that I work with who has her exact same stomach and hates it and has a completely different story around why they hate it.
Yes. And that's what I love about storytelling is if we see ourselves as the author, that we can, I look back and see how I changed my community around me. I changed characters. I got rid of some characters in my story. And as I started new chapters, there were new characters. And as I age, there gets to be this new experience with my body in a new way, of the aging body. But I am the author. And this is where it's so hard because of the pressure and the amount of messages that we get from society, and then that filtering down into the human beings in our personal world. And if they are critical of themselves or of us, it's so hard to be able to remember who we want to be and how we want to feel about ourselves, which really then leads us into the fifth competency, build community.
So talk about that. And also the fact that you started all this 2 decades ago when the internet was in its real infancy, and now it is become a whole other thing. So the building community, how much of that is offline versus online, and how has that shifted?
It shifted a lot, and now it's shifting even more back to being online with we're on lockdown with the whole coronavirus. So creating online community is going to be really powerful at this point. And so, so build community. We can't do any of the other competencies without having even just one person in our lives who is choosing to also live what we call a body positive life, which is honoring there is no perfection, honoring the human experience, but doing the work to say, I want to have a more peaceful relationship with my body and my life. And so, and I just need to back up one moment and say, all of this work doesn't mean that someone's not going to want to make changes with their body. And so I want to honor that, especially for people who are not connected to the gender that they were assigned at birth and want to have transition surgery and want to change their gender, that is part of being body positive as well, that it doesn't mean, or someone struggling. It's really important to put that out there right now, that when I say having a more peaceful relationship with one's body, that means that we are doing the work to feel in alignment with who we are on all levels. So having others in our lives who are choosing to live this way too makes it all really work. Our in-person gatherings are incredibly powerful. It's so beautiful to see people come together. And when you create a space where there's no comparison and there's no judgment and there's this open space to be brave and vulnerable, it's so beautiful to see how people connect with one another and truly see that there is more light in the room as people start to lift off these burdens of shame and guilt and all of the things and body hatred. It's just powerful to see. Staying connected with people like that, whether it's a phone call, whether it's an email, whether it's being online with somebody through social media in a way that is connecting instead of picking ourselves apart. And so instead of connecting over body hatred, we connect with, hey, this is how I'm feeling today. I'm struggling because of all these messages, so I need support there. Or I'm feeling really good today about my body because this, or I just made this beautiful meal and I enjoyed it so much and I just need to share that with you. Or all of these different ways to connect is really important. I have a young woman in my life who when she goes to the doctor, she gets harassed about her body size. And so when she was younger, she sometimes would go, and then afterwards she would feel so much shame that she would binge and then feel terrible. And so this one experience happened where then she called me. And so I said, next time, call me as soon as you leave the doctor, before you self-harm. And so she started doing that so she could remember who she was, even after having been tortured by the doctors and the nurses telling her she needed to lose weight, even though she was perfectly healthy. So having that kind of community, being able to reach out, to be able to remember who we are is how I think of it.
Which is also a really good reminder, because I think someone could read building community and think, oh gosh, okay, now I need to now find this huge group of people.
Mm-hmm.
And actually what you demonstrated is community can be one person, and
Yes.
it can be having conversations with one person. And so I think that can take away some of the overwhelm that maybe can come up when they see build community. I mean, the other thing that I'm wondering for you guys, so when did you shift some or more of your trainings online versus doing them in person?
Well, we built the fundamentals course, which is the course that takes people through the 5 competencies of the model. That was 2018. That was the spring of 2018. And then last year we put up our facilitator training. So if people love the work and want to teach it to others, that just happened last fall. So it's pretty brand new. We've been mostly in person for decades. And so I'm really excited about this right now because we're training people all over the world. I just, right before we got on our call, I was watching this video of one of our facilitators in Chile, and she's doing the most beautiful work, and she just took it out to her community in this wonderful way. She's a songwriter too, and she wrote this song, and she asked women about how they feel about their bodies. And she has this whole beautiful video of women speaking about their bodies. And we have someone in Nepal and Mongolia, and I mean, all over the world now that are taking these tools and offering them to people to be able to shift how they feel. So that makes me very excited.
Yeah, that's amazing. And just the part of the reason I was asking around this is you talked about how amazing when doing these trainings, it can be in the room. So yeah, I'm just wondering when some of that shifted more online, was there a focus of like, okay, how do we get that same kind of openness and vulnerability and whatever that then creates by being in the room with other people?
We were concerned about that. Definitely. And so when we were making our training and the videos of Elizabeth and me, we have some of us together in conversation, and people love those because it's just us and we're just chatting with each other. And some of the teaching, I mean, when I look at the videos, I see me and I feel like it's me. I wish that I could be in the room. It's harder to talk to a camera, but we have a lot of conversation. And in our facilitator training, we have a lot of our facilitators who have worked with us, and they're teaching and doing things, and you really get the sense of who we are. And I've gotten the feedback from others who have taken the training saying they feel Elizabeth and me coming through, and they feel our energy, and they feel the love, and they feel it almost like we are. I mean, obviously it's never the same as being together energetically, person to person, but it's pretty darn close. So I'm really happy with that feedback because it's all pretty brand new. So I'm very excited about that feedback. And then yesterday, as I said, I did this meeting, and we had 2 of our younger facilitators doing some work with people in the body positive world, and we did the activities online. We did the beauty activity, and we did a self-love activity, critical voice, working with the critical voice. And it went really well. It worked. And it was a small group. There were 5 of us. And I think you can see it working, especially in small groups, and then getting people in their own little chat rooms together online. I think it's very powerful. So with the way the world is right now, I'm really glad that people can connect in this way.
Yeah. Well, it seems like that's going to kind of be the only option for a little while.
Yes, I know. And another thing, I think that in terms of young people, adults are always blaming social media as the main reason why young people have body hatred. And I just was working with a group of high school students, and one of them was saying, well, I love social media because my friends and I are really supportive of one another. And so we teach intuitive social media use, just like with intuitive eating. How do you feel? So if you're following people who are all about diet culture, and it's all about weight loss, and it's all about perfection, how does that make you feel? Oh, you feel worse about yourself. You feel like you're comparing. You feel like you're not good enough. Okay. Now you have choice. Do you want to keep going in that direction? I'm not telling you shouldn't, because I'm not in charge of your life. But how do you want to feel? Do you want to feel better? Maybe you don't want to follow that. Maybe you choose to say, I'm not going to do that today. And I'm going to find someone who makes me feel uplifted. And then how can we shift our social media feeds in order to be having something that makes us feel good if we're choosing to do that? So that, again, I think is an option. And all of this comes down to there is personal responsibility. There's also honoring the trauma, and there's honoring the societal pressures. And yet, for me, I think that it really comes back to, this is my one life. Each day, if I can ask myself, how do I want to feel, and how can I get closer to having that more joy and more love and more pleasure and fun while I'm here on the planet.
I really agree. And I think the social media thing, or even just the internet in general, like, yes, that can create a lot of harm, but it can also create a lot of good. And I imagine that if back in the day when you were struggling with bulimia, if there was people online who were able to give you information, to offer support, like how helpful that could be. And so, yeah, it does come back to how are you able to kind of curate things that are helpful for you, or how can you be self-aware around what is going to be supporting you in that intuitive way?
Yes. Yeah, I think there's so many things about my life. If I had had an online community, I think I also probably would have been a victim of sexual harassment online, because I was in person and through bad situations that happened. So I think it would have been a blessing and a curse for me when I was young, because there wasn't much support. But I think if there had been a body positive program in my school, where it was actually in person in my school, it would have completely changed how things went for me, because I would have had a place to go where I was safe to talk about a lot of the things that were happening to me that definitely contributed to my eating disorder. And so that's the piece for our work, is how can we create communities, whether they're online, whether they're in person, but especially teaching for young ones who are isolated and thinking it's all them and they're the only ones struggling, but all ages. But really, if we can work with young children growing up, knowing that this is really their birthright to feel good about themselves and to see the beauty in their bodies and not ever question that and think something's wrong with them. Imagine what the world could be like then. That would be amazing.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, no matter what changes have taken place and how many good things there could potentially be, there is no part of me that wants to be a teenager right now.
No. I'm grateful I made it to this age. I mean, I just did, for this coaching work I'm doing, I had to write down my life stages, and I really took it on, and I took each part of my life and wrote notes about what happened to me during those times. And I just think, I don't think I want to go back at all, any age. And I think people are so afraid of aging. Here's another thing I just have to say, I think in ending this, that we try so hard to be healthy. Part of that is so we will live longer lives, but then we hate the body that we get if we live a longer life. And this is something I've been thinking about a lot lately, that the body's going to age no matter what. And so if you're lucky and you stay healthy and you do all those things to give you longevity, then you're going to look old. And so it's sad to me that people strive and they're so tight about and fearful about trying to be healthy when they're not really paying attention to what the purpose of that is. Yes, it's to have a long life. And then you're going to look like you've lived.
Yeah.
And be grateful for that, and do the work to shed the bullshit of society at that point in our lives too, to be able to say, I made it. This is me. And here I am, and let go of all of that pressure to try and be something, and be grateful that, and however many years we all have left, who knows?
Yeah, totally. Yeah. Cause it's not about living the longest amount of time. It's like, how can you enjoy the time that you do have and be present during the time that you do have? I remembering, like, there's a Robert Sapolsky quote about, like, people just working harder and harder to to get into the care home of their choosing. Of like,
Yeah.
you do all of these different things for what? And so, if you're not then paying attention to and being able to embrace and enjoy the journey, then what's left?
Yes. And that's why I get sad, is seeing people who are living with so much fear around their bodies, fear around how I fit in, how I don't fit in, fear of being all the things that society puts on us, and society meaning then whatever that is that's in the air and coming from corporate advertising or capitalism or whatever it is that then filters down into the people in our lives. And so, it's just coming so much. It's amazing that we all can feel as good as we do. But how can we keep shedding the fear and really having that pleasure of, I am here, I am living, and this body allows me to be here on the planet.
Definitely. So look, Connie, this has been wonderful. Is there anything that we didn't cover, I didn't ask you that you want to mention?
Well, just if you want to let people know how to find us, we are thebodypositive.org. The is very important in finding us, because there's a lot of body positive out there, but we are thebodypositive.org. And just would love, if people are interested in personally doing the work, we have our fundamentals. There's my book, Embody, and that's a great way to get to know me more and to hear more stories from other people who are doing this work. There's beautiful stories from a hugely diverse group of people in the book. And then if people are interested and excited about this and want to bring it to their communities, we would be honored to have you become a facilitator, and anyone can become a facilitator. So I invite people in, and our social media is lovely and supportive. Our Instagram is really beautiful, and people are loving it and feeling uplifted by it. So just really want to stay connected to people in any way that we can and support the healing of others who are struggling now, or helping others who are in the struggle with their bodies.
Perfect. Well, look, I'm going to put all of those links in the show notes so people can go there to obviously the body positive people can go to, but in terms of Instagram and other social media, they can find it in the show notes. But thank you so much for your time today, Connie. I really enjoyed this conversation. Oh,
it's been a pleasure, Chris. And I just want to say to you, I love hearing about your relationship with your son and with your partner, and it just fills my heart with a lot of joy, and knowing you're doing the work to help others feel good about their bodies. So thank you for what you're doing. It moves me.
Oh, that is lovely to hear, and right back at you. Thank you for everything you are doing.
Well, my pleasure. To be continued.
So that is today's interview. Connie was such a pleasure to chat with. I highly recommend her book, Embodied, and checking out The Body Positive. I personally love what they're doing and the trainings they're doing, and I just like seeing what they're putting out into the world. So today I have 2 recommendations for you for things you might want to be checking out. One is light and easy. The other is more heavy going. So starting at the more heavy end of the spectrum, it's a podcast called the Catch and Kill podcast by Ronan Farrow. So Farrow was the journalist who broke the Harvey Weinstein scandal, and the podcast is really all about this and the 2 years of work that he put into trying to bring all of this to light. And while I'd obviously heard some of the allegations about Harvey Weinstein, and kind of how could I not have? It was such a big story. But what was fascinating was the depths of the story. So both the depths of Weinstein's behavior, but the difficulty that Farrow faced in trying to get the story published and to see the light of day. And you really get the sense from listening that if you are powerful enough and if you have enough money, there's a lot that you can do to silence people and make problems disappear. So it's definitely not a light podcast, but it's produced really well and it's intriguing and eye-opening. And it's called the Catch and Kill podcast by Ronan Farrow. So the lighter end of the spectrum, I must have been living under a rock, but I've only recently discovered the TV show Community. So the first season came out in 2009 and it finished up in 2015, after 6 seasons. I definitely heard of the show and knew of its existence, but for some reason it just passed me by. But now I'm really loving it. It's very easy viewing. It's super funny. There's lots of movie and TV references, and given my love for this stuff, I'm really a sucker for it. And each episode is only 20 minutes or so it's easy to just dip in and dip out of. And so if you're looking for something that is light and funny to watch, which given the climate and the times that we're living through might be something that you're interested in, and if you're somehow if you're like me and somehow missed this a decade ago when it first came out, then I would recommend checking out Community. It's on Netflix, it's on Amazon Prime, and probably other places online as well. So that is it for this week. As I mentioned at the top of the show, 7 Health is currently taking on clients. If you are struggling with disordered eating, an eating disorder, recovery, body image issues, chronic dieting, any of the topics that we cover as part of the show, then please get in contact. You can go to 7-health.com/help. I will be back with another episode next week. Until then, take care of yourself, stay safe, and I'll catch you soon.